In your relationship with one another, Philippians 2:5, it's in your bulletin. In your relationship with one another, redo. Have the same mindset as Christ Jesus, who, being in the very nature of God, did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. Rather, he made himself nothing by taking the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness. And being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to death, even death on a cross. Therefore, God exalted him to the highest place and gave him the name that is above every name. And at the name of Jesus, that every knee should bow in heaven and on earth and under the earth, and every tongue acknowledge that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. Interesting verses, hard but easy verses. While serving overseas, I would daily go to the ferreteria where I was building. It was a hardware store. My Spanish was and is limited. I would have to charade what I needed in the store. Hammer was maeta, nails, claves, screws. That was I just wanted to mimic. It's kind of hard. Is tornillos. Then I learned a word. It was for a type of screw that I needed. I went in with confidence. I was stoked. It was a specialized screw, and asked for it. The whole hardware store just basically started laughing and erupted in laughter, which was great because I used the same thing for years later. Because that's one thing that happens in Mexico or Brazil when you laugh at each other, you come to be friends. But the word taquetes means molly screw, and what I said is I need taquitos, and so they just thought it was the craziest thing. Not as bad as one of my pastor buddies, Manny, who would always come and say, "I love boogers," and I'm like, "What? I love boogers." I know, burgers. Anyways, it was one of the many stupid moments for me, and reminding me of my limitations as an English speaker trying to learn Spanish. But it also provides, I'm sharing this with you because it's a helpful way of thinking about how Jesus approached the incarnation. The word incarnation means how Jesus could have been fully God and fully human. We were just talking about this last night. It's two natures in one person. After all the supernatural signs and wonders he did notwithstanding, when that first century holy man walked on this earth, the people who encountered him, they encountered a human being. A man unlike any man they had ever met, of course, but still, for all that, a man. But so in what way was this man also incarnate? The theologians will use this word, we've used it before, the word kenosis. It's a Greek word, it means emptying, to drain. And Paul says that Jesus was in his very nature God, but he did not see equality with God as something to be exploited. Rather, he emptied himself, being made in human likeness. Now, the word exploited, we use it differently a lot of times. It's almost a negative word that we'll use. Oh, she exploited it. But the word they're using it for is to draw on, make full sense of, and derive benefit from. He didn't want to take advantage of the situation. The idea was that somehow the Son of God drained himself in some way related to him being God when he became a human being. But if he emptied himself of his divine nature, wouldn't he have ceased to be truly God? In what way can we then say that he revealed God to us? He's just another guy. And here's where my taquitos comes in. When I chose to move to Mexico, I knew that this would mean having certain limitations placed on me as an English speaker among Spanish speakers. To be sure, there'd be some overlap in English and Spanish. I would use vocalized sounds to communicate meaning, like they do. But through my time there, I would also draw on my nature as an English speaker to various degrees in various ways, depending on my circumstances. Sometimes I might even speak English, revealing myself to be an Anglophone, an English first speaker. Well, then when I did, it's unlikely my Hispanophone, Spanish first speakers would get my meaning. But as long as I was required to speak Spanish, there would be certain unavoidable limitations on my ability to express myself and communicate. For me to go up and preach in-depth things does not work for me in Mexico. I just don't have that gift, the grasp. And it's very rare that somebody who would be it would be their second nature to have that theological ability to share the in-depth things. However, because no matter how wonderful or clear or clunky my Spanish was, I never ceased to be an English first speaker. I might have sophisticated thoughts I can express, but they're just in English, but they won't cross over. So it's just that accepting the limitations of a Spanish nature, I was choosing to set aside the use of my English one. And that's, you understand where I'm going with this? That's the same with the incarnation. And taking in on our human nature, the Son of God did not drain himself of his divinity, while rather he accepted the limitations of our human nature. He chose not to draw on his divine nature only when he was keeping in the Father's will and the Spirit's leading, miracles and things like this. These limitations were real. It wasn't like some fake thing. He got hungry, he got tired, he rested, he ate. He grew and matured as a child, he bled. It doesn't mean he ceased to be fully God. Rather, just like English and Spanish natures can exist without contradiction, in the same persons, both nature, they were both one in him. And sometimes we see, in a sense, him speaking English to his Spanish friends. That's it. That is what he was doing. He was revealing his divine nature. Like his disciples, when they saw him walking on the water, they said, "Surely this man is the Son of God." Or himself saying, "I and the Father are one. You see me, you see the Father." That's pretty straightforward. The other thing that's interesting to me, that if it got too hard for me overseas in Brazil or Mexico, if I got tired of being looked at different, tired of being different, tired of going in and not being able to communicate, tired of not being able to express myself fully, I could take a break. I could go home. Or I could go on FaceTime and talk to somebody. Jesus had that option also. He could always have said, "Not worth it." But he didn't. He wrote it out. And when he was lonely, example, as he prayed, he talked to the Father. So, anyways, so study on this. This was a 3-minute treatise on it. It's fascinating. So here's where I want to go. Move on to 12, verse 12. "Therefore, my dear brothers, my dear friends, as you have always obeyed, not only in my presence, but now much more in my absence, continue to work out your salvation with fear and trembling. For it is God who works in you, to will and to act in accord to fulfill his good purpose. Do everything without grumbling or arguing, so that you may become blameless and pure, children of God without fault in a warped and crooked generation. Then you will shine among them like stars in the sky as you hold firmly to the word of life. And then I will be able to boast on the day of Christ that I didn't run or labor in vain. My work was not done in vain. But even as I am being poured out like a drink offering on a sacrifice and service from your faith, I am glad and rejoice with you. Shine among them like stars." We know that light is essential to our existence on this planet. We all know that. Light is needed for our plants, photosynthesis. We use it to navigate through darkness, driving from Lahui to Princeville, a little rough without light. There are objects in front of us. We need to know what to do with them. We make our decisions. Do we go through them or go around them? It's also important to our emotional makeup. You're all island people. And we chose to live here because what happens when you go into cold areas, you get a thing called SAD. It's actually it's a seasonal affective disorder, SAD. When the days become short and there's less light, it affects our mood. They become depressed. We get depressed when it rains for 4 or 5 days in a row, or 6 months, like the first year we moved here. Most of human history, when the sun goes down, everything kind of stopped. Cities would shut down. There are no lights to speak of. People would light wheat candles made out of different types of fat, whale fat, any type of fat, in their homes. Farmers would stop farming. Armies would stop marching. They would set campfires. They would pause for the night. Ships could not navigate in harbors unless there was a lighthouse. But now we live in a modern era where those days are gone. We have artificial lighting. You can go to a room, flip a switch, light up a stadium, put our words up on the deal. And you know what it's like to fly at night when you're flying over and you look down and you see the cities just brightening up, those little islands of light that represent people. And some of you right now are following along as I'm in my iPad now, thank you, the screen that is backlit. There's light coming out of it. So we're reading scripture and we're dependent on the light that is emitted from the diodes for me to be able to read this. And we have lights all around us, and more are coming in the next couple weeks, this next month, everywhere. Christmas, love it. I loved it when my parents would put the lights up in the house, and the old screw-in ones, you know those ones that, then when you take them down, they'll pop, and then next year you're like, and so you have to take a potato to get them out. They're horrible, they're horrible. Now it's just like you throw up a string, and you got 15 different bouncy lights. Awesome. Now I love it. Now I have this cool little Christmas candle. I get one every year, because I'm goofy that way. And it's kind of cool. And so what it is, it's pine. And so And if you're in a tent with this little candle, it's a source of light. You don't have any electricity. It's a little warm. It's attractive. If it was dark in here, it looks way cooler. They flickering. You can see it everywhere. And there's some Christians that this is how we shine our light. They have a nice glow about them. They glow off over here by themselves, and they're just glowing. And you see them, and it's amazing. They even smell nice. And that's one way of doing it in our darkness. Here's another way. This is my absolute favorite flashlight I've ever had. I have actually shined this at you before. Now I've done this, and it's horrible. How does that feel? You like this? Not so much. Not so much. And the older I get, it's funny, the worse it is. And some Christians, we're the kind that we walk up like cops. Ever had that? Knocking on your window, looking in there, seeing if you're carrying something, what you're doing, are you sinning? What are you doing? You know you're doing. And even if you're doing nothing, you feel like you're doing something. It's just a bad feel. And but now I have a get out of jail free card, so I'm okay. Oh no, the chief resigned. I might be in trouble. And maybe this works sometimes to go up to people and kind of point out. Some people need a little thump, but odds are maybe not so well. We all know the thumper Christians. And then maybe another way than just glowing in your own little environment or smacking somebody, lighting their faith. There's what we call, our title is a flashlight believer. That's the one that shines the way out of darkness. They go, let's go that way. That's where Jesus is. We're pointing to him. We're pointing to him. You know somebody that needs Jesus? Yeah, everybody does. And you might be that one person that has the opportunity to be that flashlight. You've been praying. You've been hoping and praying for that person, and he or she just came to mind. But keep doing it. Now it's interesting. Try not doing this too much. This is a tough one. Try not pointing it at yourself and look at me, look how I do. When working with ex-convicts, guys with bad pasts and past home life, bad dads, the danger was that I was not only their workout partner maybe, and then friend, and then pastor, and then dad, and then I'm perfect. But I know me, I fail. It all tumbles. It's better for us to keep that light on Jesus. It's a much better approach. So let's look at our verse 14 with that in mind. You see how Paul has a theme with this. Do all things without complaining or disputing. Some of me already feels convicted just reading that. Moving to principle has been unique for us. It's like, feel right in complaining. That you may become blameless and harmless children of God without fault in the midst of a crooked and perverse generation, among whom you shine as lights in the world. Hold fast the word of life, that I may rejoice in the day. Now let me catch you up to speed what's going on in the epistle. You guys know this. We've gone over that Paul writes a letter to the Philippian church. They're worried about Christians in Philippi. They're worried about themselves. They're worried about Paul. Paul's in prison. He's been arrested. He's in jail. Our biggest stalwart example of Christianity for those Christians in those days is gone. They don't know what's going to happen to them. They're confused by the circumstances. So Paul writes a letter. He says, first of all, we've gone through this week by week, we are partners of the gospel. I'm in jail, but you're not. And I want you to know that my incarceration, my circumstances, has turned out for the furtherance of the gospel. I'm incarcerated, the gospel is not. It's being furthered. And he again says, I'm in jail, but you're there. And while you're there, this is how I want you to act. These are some lessons for you to act. I want you to be, what's the word we've talked over and over again? Joyful. I want you to be joyful. I want you to be humble. I want you to be loving. I want you to serve each other. And the greatest example of this, and this is where he's getting here now, is Jesus himself, who left heaven, came to earth, took on a human body, and humbled himself to the point of death. And God exalted him, so be like that. That's where we are so far. And Paul's saying this, why? Why should we be this way? Because the world is watching. And the world, they're watching our lives. We talked about it a few weeks ago. I saw one of you guys I saw Chauncey, and we're looking at each other's baskets. Chauncey is one of the pastors at Calvary, and we're seeing what they're getting. I was by the donut aisle. So, but that's how the world is. They're looking in your basket, see what you're getting. Our actions leads them out of darkness. You shine as light and you shine the light. There's a man driving his car. A woman was driving behind him in another vehicle. Put yourself in her shoes. They're at a stoplight. Okay, we don't have stoplights. They're at the bridge. When the light turned green, the man in the lead car did not look up. He was looking down, maybe at his phone. But he didn't go. It's green. His car didn't go. The lady in the car behind him did see the light. And so what does she do? She let him know kindly by honking her horn. She honked her horn. The guy in the lead car didn't budge, so she starts honking and honking and honking again. Now she's getting mad. It's taking 15, 20 seconds. She rolled down her window and yelled. Nothing happened. But just about when the light turned yellow, right before it turned red, he looked up, noticed it, ever happened to you, and zoomed through the intersection, leaving the woman go through a whole minute-and-a-half cycle. Oh my goodness. Well, now she's fuming. And she rolls her windows down, puts her arms out, and gives a certain gesture. Not that one. She yells some very choice words, ranting, raving, pounding the steering wheel, and then she notices a police officer with a gun pointed at her, coming at her. Ma'am, I want to see both hands. I'm going to open the car door with your hands up. When you get out of the vehicle, she gets out of the vehicle. Perfect tactics. Policeman puts her arms behind her, puts her in handcuffs, takes her to jail. She's in the cell for 2 hours. After 2 hours, the same cop comes out and says, ma'am, I'm very sorry for the misunderstanding. But you have to know that as I was listening to the words you were saying, I was watching the gesture you were making, I was watching you ranting and raving and going through all those contortions. I'd also noticed in the back of your vehicle the "What Would Jesus Do" bumper sticker and the little chrome fish that's on your trunk and the "Follow Me to Sunday School" license plate holder. Naturally, I assumed that you'd stolen the car. Fair enough. The message on the car was very different than the message coming from inside the car. So the world's watching us, and what are they assuming? I want to share how to glow in the dark. And what I'd like to do is, looking at the test, give you a real quick strategy. First, you have to understand the world we live in. I'm not going to get into politics, but for many people, this last 2 weeks seems a little brighter. Like there's a little better. There's a little more hope for 76 million people. But it doesn't matter. What is the condition of the world? Paul describes his world 2,000 years ago as a crooked and perverse generation. Have we gotten better or worse? Are we still crooked and perverse? The word crooked is a word in Greek that you'll be familiar with. The word is scoliosis. Scolios. It's where we get scoliosis. It's where the bending of the spine, you can't support the weight. By using this word, Paul is saying that the world we live in is morally bent, spiritually deformed, and unable to support the weight of life. It's a hugely strong word. The second word, perverse, it's kind of the same thing, but it's it means to twist and turn. We are in a twisted, morally contorted word. And if the language surprises you, it shouldn't, because Jesus said, faithless and perverse generation, how long shall I be with you? How long shall I bear with you? So as Christian people, we need to view our world plainly. And also we need to look at it spiritually. And third is ultimately. So let me explain those statements. There's something about a plain, honest look at the world. We are on an island, and many of us came here to fast, to distance ourselves from that information, from the COVID, from politics, but we need to remember, according to the FBI in the USA, there is a murder every, how many minutes do you think? 11. A rape, that's worse, 3.8 minutes. A theft every 30 seconds. That's before the IRS gets you. Bam, bam. That's a plain look at your world. That's the world we live in. That's the nation we have. However, we need not just look at it plainly, but spiritually. When Jesus would look at a crowd, he looked at a crowd very differently than Eric Lucy does. I hate crowds. Jesus knows this. I get edgy, twitchy. I don't like lines. I don't like traffic. I mean, some of you are agreeing with me. But Jesus, when he looked at the crowds, he looked at them differently than I do. He says he saw the crowd, the multitude, and he's moved to compassion for them. Because they were weary and scattered like sheep having no shepherd. And I think, boy, I wish I could look at people like that. I want to look at people like that. So we've got to view it plainly. We are a broken and perverse scoliosis generation. Spiritually, hurting people, and eternally. Because those who are in moral and spiritual darkness, that is unchecked and unchanged, they have eternal consequences. That should drive me to be compassionate for them. And Paul describes this. He says, the conditions have never been better. The conditions have never been better for us to shine. Because the darker it gets, the brighter our light can shine. And so we complain, man, the world's getting dark. Shine brighter, shine brighter. You heard the saying, don't curse the darkness, turn on the light. Some things about light, it's electromagnetic energy. Remember this, I had to look it up. Travels at 106,000 miles a second. That's how fast it goes when it's not in a vacuum. I mean, sunlight takes 8 minutes to get from the sun to Earth, which is 93 million miles away. So light that we're enjoying now left the sun 8 minutes ago. And then there's this thing called an eclipse. And we know that the object, the moon, which is much, much, much smaller than the sun, can block the Earth from the rays of the sun. So it passes between Earth and it's blocking the rays. An eclipse must never happen with us. We must never block the glory of the Son of God to Earth. Something else. For light to be effective, it has to be seen. That makes sense. It's not light has to be seen. Paul says this, among whom you shine as lights in the world. For us to be effective, we need to be around people who are in darkness. For light to be noticeable, we need to be in the darkness with them. But we have to be strong. You can't damp your light and go in there. You keep your light. It's an honor to be invited to certain things and be able to talk Jesus with them in places where they haven't heard it or normally be hurt by it. Most people would like to hear more. Most people in some generations have been hurt by church all the time. In just constant conversations. That's why I like the gym. You guys have your own gyms. If all we do is shine among people who are already shining, and that's why they call stealing sheep. Like, oh, a bunch of the Calvary people want to come to your church. No, that's your church. It's kind of like they're complaining about the Somalians coming over and leaving their war-torn country. Like, stay there and fix it. Stay there and fix it. Don't run. Fight for your country. Fight for Ukraine. Fight for it. We didn't personally, but 200 years ago. But the same thing, love your church. But if all you're doing is shining on Sunday morning, it's great. We're worshiping God. We're shining. We need to do that. That's what we're called to do. The Bible says that. We understand it's like going to the gas station and filling up for the week. But if that's the only place we're shining, we're not doing the world any good. Here I am, I'm shining, this is the light of mine, my church. That's cool. But we have to leave this place, and it's like this. You know, if I walk out with my flashlight, it's cool. But if I walk to my car with my flashlight on, would you think that's weird? It's like wearing your mask. Remember COVID, people driving their car with their mask on by themselves? I know you see that. You don't need it to go where you're going. The sun is brighter than my flashlight. But that's like Christians who only shine in the church around other Christians. We need to be in the darkness to shine it. That's two ways to do this, attitude and action. You need the right attitude, do all things without complaining. And guess what it says? So I was looking at this, I made a discovery. I like looking up words. You know what it means in the Greek, what it says when it says do all things without suffering or without complaining? You know what the Greek says about that? It means all things. All things. We know all things work together for the good of those who love God. You know what this means to complain? Let me give you what this word means. It literally means, what he's saying is mumbling in a low undertone. It's under your breath. It's just mumbling. Pastor's going too long, worship. It's that mumbling. And it's like this, you're shining in with your flashlight in the world, complaining. Shining, complaining. Is that effective in winning people? Is a complaining, grumbling, disputing believer going to bring people out of darkness into light? Because they expect that of us as Christ followers now. So let me finish with this. Father began the breakfast every morning with a very pious prayer. Oh, Heavenly Father, we thank you this day for all the food and all the goodness that you provide. Then afterwards, he started complaining about the coffee being too weak, his wife making the eggs run and being late for this and that and rushing. So the little daughter is listening at the table and she says, hey, Daddy, did God hear you thank him in your prayer? Well, of course, a teachable moment. Of course God hears our prayers. Well, Daddy, did God hear you complain about Mom and the eggs and the coffee? And he got nervous now and says, well, yeah, I guess God did hear me say that. And she innocently said, well then, Daddy, which one does God believe? Which one does God believe? Now, an unbeliever looking at us, which one are they to believe? The complaining you or the you that ought to follow God because he's the awesome you? That's the attitude. All things. Well, here Paul is speaking of sharing our faith with people, preaching the gospel, not just knowing it, but showing it, sharing it, speaking it, evangelizing it. So we glow in the dark by living our lives differently. What we exemplify in our life must be amplified by us. And some of us, well, I'm a silent witness. I like to live my witness. And that's okay if you're living your witness. It's like my little candle. It's over there. It's got a warm, nice glow. It's awesome. But you never actually get to tell people it's awesome, why it's awesome, why you are so warm, why you've got this cool little glow going on in your life. If they never know how that happened, they're not going to go know how to get out of spiritual darkness themselves. We have to share with our lips, our attitude and the action. And here's this last verse. Paul says this. This is a harsh, horrible verse, but I want you to understand what he's saying. I am being poured out as a drink offering. This is an amazing verse, the imagery. In ancient times, pagan cultures, they had a thing called a libation, and where they would take a vessel of glass, maybe wine with it, and they pour it on top of a sacrifice that was being made. And the symbolic is of, I'm going all in, I'm all in. In Judaism, in the Old Testament, there was the drink offering. It was poured out. Paul is seeing his life this way. He's in jail, he's suffering. He says, I might not make it out of here alive. I'm incarcerated. I might have to pour my whole life out and be killed. And in 2 Timothy, which is his last letter, his last writing that we have from him, he said this, I am already being poured out as a drink offering. My death is at hand. And even if that happens, I don't care. The sacrifice and service of your faith keeps me going. Paul's saying this, Philippians, us, all of our glowing, all of our light bearing, all of our gospel preaching, all of our attitude adjusting, you need to see that as part of your worship to God, because that takes it to a whole new level. That's your spiritual act of worship, glowing in the dark. So let's leave this place that we're shining so brightly and go out into a dark and crooked and perverse generation. I'm going to finish with this, my second finish. How many of you guys drink Coke products? In Mexico, we drink Coke all the time. You're Coke people. Sorry, Coca-Cola's not in it. Coke wins. Remember that phrase? This is why. A few years ago, they had a stated goal of Coca-Cola Corporation. They said, our goal is we want every person on earth to at least taste Coca-Cola. Every person. That's our goal. They stated their goal. Pretty lofty goal. I want everybody in the world to taste Coca-Cola. And this is how they've done. As of today, how many people have heard of Coke? 97% of the world has heard of Coca-Cola. And 51% has tasted Coca-Cola. And you say, well, that's just barely over half. That's not 100%. You know how long they've been around? 100 years. And in 100 years they've been around, over half the world's population has tasted Coca-Cola. How long have we been around, Christ follower? 2,000 years. I know things go better with Coke, but things go way better with Jesus. And we can't feel bad about our numbers. We can't boast the same numbers as Coca-Cola. It's time for us to glow and get in the game. And to glow, we have to go to Jesus and grow in him. The famous quote from Steve Jobs he was trying to get this Pepsi executive, John Scully, to come work for him. And he said this, you want to sell sugar water for the rest of your life? Or do you want to come with me and change the world?